So this webinar will be recorded, and for those of you that are joining us today, LA Unified staff, we are recording these and eventually plan to make them accessible to non-transition staff in MyPLN. For transition staff, you can find the recording links on SharePoint. And again, thanks to those of you who were able to join us on time today. I'm sure we will have a few more people coming in, but we're going to go ahead and get started. So I think this is the 5th week of our Transition Institute. So you guys, those of you that have been joining us all 5 weeks, maybe are now knowing how these start, but I'm just going to introduce myself. My name is Jackie Tolge. I'm the coordinator of Transition Services. We do have LA Unified Transition staff on this call, as well as non-LA Unified staff. We are pleased that others were able to join us. And I am now going to hand it over to Ann Nygren, who's going to give you a little preview of today before we hand it over to our presenters. And welcome back to Yvonne and Nicole.
Hi, everybody. I'm Ann Nygren, and here we are, the 5th seminar within the Transition Institute. So far we've learned about A through G and graduation requirements, due process and legally defensible ITPs, job carving, teaching work readiness skills, and today, work-based learning best practices. So basically, what are all the tips, strategies, and components of a really awesome work-based learning program? We are grateful to have Grit and Flow back again today to lead today's seminar. Nicole Seward and Ivan Stanokovic have enlightened us the last 2 weeks with content, so we look forward to another great learning experience today. Before I hand it over, this webinar will be recorded, and if you have questions, please use the Q&A feature. Timing-wise, please plan to be here for at least an hour. And like all of the other seminars, we will post a link in the chat to a quick 5-question survey asking for your feedback. Thank you all for being here. And with that, I will turn it over to Nicole and Ivan.
Thank you for the awesome welcome, and thank you for having us back. So we're excited to be here. This is our 3rd and final session, at least with us. So one of the things that we wanted to make sure that we do is we allow for a little bit more of an opportunity for Q&A at the very end, so that we can answer any questions that you have regarding today's presentation or any other presentation that we've done in the last few weeks. So with that, I'm going to share my screen. Okay, Nicole, you're representing everyone. Can you see my screen okay?
I can, yes.
Very cool. So as per usual, my name is Ivan Stanokovic. We have Nicole Seward here. A lot of the information that we're providing to you today is based off of actual research that has been done in this area, as well as some best practices. So why don't we jump on in? So some quick housekeeping points is that, like Ann said, please utilize the Q&A section, I guess, of Zoom. If any questions pop up as we're going, Nicole's going to be looking at those and answering them as they come up. And then Nicole, if you want to take the next one.
Yeah, sure. So we use identity first language mostly in this presentation. Identity first language is really important to the autistic community, which means you refer to us, I am autistic. You refer to us as an autistic person and not a person with autism. This is mostly because we cannot separate autism from who we are as people. So saying that we're with something kind of implies we can leave it behind whenever we choose. So we can't, it's part of our core identity. So we prefer identity first language. That is not the case, obviously, with everyone. So definitely ask any autistic or disabled person that you come into whether they prefer person first or identity first language.
Thank you, Nicole. And again, a lot of the things we're talking about are best practices. Sometimes it's extremely difficult to start off at the best practice point, but as long as you know what to build up to, it could be helpful to know what to aim for. And then as always, red tape not included. Different districts, different schools have different rules that they have to follow. There's also the limit of time. So sometimes that comes into play as well when building up towards best practices. So with that, let's get started. So, 1 second. Okay, so we're going to ask you to do something that you typically tell your students not to do. I want to ask you to take out your phones. So we're going to be doing a lot of different polls throughout the session today to kind of increase the participation, and also be able to contextualize this work towards your specific needs. So there's about 84 of us in here, so we won't be able to get to everything, but we'll share our contact information at the very end so that you can contact us with any additional questions. So we're using a software called Poll Everywhere. So all you need to do is just, let me be a good instructor, and just text this phone number up top with this message below to be able to join the group. So I'm going to put in all the notes here and just give it a little bit of time. For each poll that we do, if I move too fast and you're not able to capture this, you will be able to, what is it? The information will be listed above the poll and it can be put in that way. And maybe actually Nicole or Anne, maybe you can put in the number that needs to be texted and what message needs to be texted in the chat. So if people come in late, if it populates for them, they can jump along too. Perfect, thank you. Okay, so let's get going. So just quick practice. How are you feeling today? So you would write down A for feeling good or B, not feeling so good. Oh, thank God. This is always the part where it's like slight panic to see if it's going to work or not. Give it a little bit more time. Okay. Looks like everyone's feeling good. Let's try the next one. For this one is just, again, just a quick test to see what is your favorite meal.
Even there's a response in the chat that says the keyword could not be found when they tried to log in.
See that. So as long as you text.
You know, that happened to me too.
Uh-huh.
I typed in 280, but it's Ivan's 820.
Oh, 820. So did I
And
write
I don't
it in
know,
wrong?
maybe I just typed it in.
Oh, probably. So it's 820, not 280.
Yeah, you know
that was
what? We
my
wrote
fault.
280. We wrote 280 in the chat. It's 820.
Got it. Sorry about that.
Sorry
looks
about
like
that.
We're getting a few more coming in. Okay, good. Okay, a few more. Oh, sushi is good. I knew this was a bad idea putting this one up here because I'm always thinking about food, and now I'm going to be thinking about sushi through this. I like that somebody put in wine. That's a good meal as well. I respect that. Okay, cool. So it looks like it's working. It helps if we use the right code, right? So sorry about that, and thank you for figuring it out. That's why it's beneficial that it says it on the top too. Okay. So this is the agenda for today. What we're going to be talking about is we're going to do a quick review on how to establish different sites to connect your students with and how to engage with employers, how to prepare your students for employment, and then some of the best practices for knowing how to evaluate how they're doing, as well as getting the feedback back from the employers. Some areas to focus on with your students that's going to be really beneficial, not just for this placement, but later on as well. And then again, how to evaluate the relationship and how to follow up with the employer. So the next thing we're going to do is we want to hear from you. What is the area that you're most interested in learning more about or talking a little bit more about? And we'll start off there. Nicole, does your heart sink a little bit when you don't see any responses at first, or is that just mine? Yeah, okay. Let's give it a little bit more time. It was neck to neck for a second there, huh? Okay. we'll move ahead and start off with, oh, it's not neck to neck anymore. We'll start off with engaging with employers. So just a quick review. Well, yeah, just real quick, how do you feel about engaging with employers currently? Do you feel very comfortable with it? You're excited to do it? Or is it something that, it's part of the job and you would like to become a little bit more comfortable with it? And again, one thing I should also mention, these are 100% anonymous. Because again, I know my personal experience at least was I was kind of given the role without too much training. I was terrified. I'm naturally an introvert, so it wasn't something I was extremely comfortable with. But it looks like a lot of you are, which is awesome. And then what is something that you typically find as the hardest part about engaging employers? On the program? Approach is something I struggle with, is like, how do you even initiate a conversation if it's in person? With the contact. I know the program. Okay. So these seem to be consistent. Feedback. Dispelling misconceptions about people with disabilities. Okay, I like that. The availability component of it, getting them to buy in. Okay, so I'm going to close this out in a few seconds. I'm going to push the disability aspect. Okay, convincing them. Got it. Explaining how they can help and how we can help them, and selling the program. Okay, so getting through to busy managers. That's a great one. Yep. Okay, so from some of the things that you've shared, I'll definitely address them. When it comes to the approach, when it comes to selling the program, when it comes to changing minds about disability, so that they really understand what it is versus the preconceptions that they might have, are all extremely difficult tasks. But it's one of those things where confidence is extremely important and a big part of it. You have to believe in what you are selling, so to speak. You have to believe in the students that you're trying to connect with these different work sites. Some of the things that help with that is the things listed out here. So, organizing with your institution, with your group of colleagues, a list of businesses in your area, organizing them by industry, so that once you start learning an industry, once you start learning their language, you're able to connect with them better. So sometimes it can be a little bit difficult. I think I've shared last week that, again, fairly shy, fairly introverted. I didn't want to mess up connections that are local to my school. So I would practice in different neighborhoods, and I found it a lot easier to approach. Let's say I was trying to connect somebody with a dentist office, to go into the dentist offices in a different area and kind of ask them, hey, what are your needs? What do you struggle with getting done? What are things that are going really, really well? What are some things you just don't have time for? Again, trying to understand what their goals and needs are specifically. The other thing too that kind of helps is doing some social media lurking. And what I mean by that is going to websites like Glassdoor, where you get to see people's responses to the hiring process, to the company's philosophy, to the pay rates, all those different things. Even going to Reddit, to specific subgroups, subreddits that focus on that specific industry, can absolutely help in building this picture of what this industry really looks like and what their needs might be. And then once you delegate who's going to be researching which industries, you come together and share that knowledge with everyone and get to see where there are similarities in the industries Does a dentist office correlate really well with a typical doctor's office or pediatrician's office? Different things like that, so that you can have some transferable skills you can work on for all three of those sites versus working on something specific that only works for one type of industry.
Another
Um,
way that you can use that sort of research is that you can better understand their culture. So if you read reviews about their culture, this might give you insight as to if this might be like a client that you should come armed and ready for maybe some no's and how to work around those, or is this a really open culture, and do they focus on their employees? Do they have, you know, an individual approach to management? Those are the kinds of things that are going to help your students be really successful in their work-based learning opportunities.
Thank you. And again, once you understand the industry a little bit more from a distance, walking in, you will have more confidence when you're talking to the person who does get to make the decisions for partnerships. That's where it also, with that research, it helps finding out who typically is doing the hiring and the recruitment and who's responsible for making some of these decisions. Is it a hiring manager? Is it a front-end manager, a director? Is it somebody in a completely different office? All those different things can help.
You can also visit the company website and check out if they have a corporate social responsibility statement, because they may have that on their website, or some of the information in their mission might hint towards inclusion or, you know, a diverse workforce, or, you know, that kind of thing. That's another really good way to try and judge what their what your approach is going to need to have for success.
100%. I think that's a great thing to look for. I was recently working with Kaiser to develop a hiring initiative, and one of the big things that they made a shift to recently is inclusion. But then when we looked at the job descriptions, they all required at least a high school diploma, which is a huge barrier for people with disabilities. So now they're looking at working with their union to modify those job descriptions so that they are more inclusive, so that they can stay true to their new mission statement. So really, really good point. Learning the language, learning their lingo, if that might be a too big of an ask to start off with, one huge thing I would strongly recommend is to try and recognize when you're utilizing educational lingo and acronyms. For me, it's kind of cool working with Nicole because she's in a completely different state. And, you know, we have DOR, Regional Center, all these different things, all these different acronyms that are specific to LA County, Orange County, sometimes California. Nicole has similar things with similar names, and I'm sure different acronyms, but it helps kind of spot checking that, because when engaging with an employer for the first time, if they get a sense of confusion when speaking with you, it doesn't help build that connection with them. And if anything, it kind of pulls them away from it. However, if you're able to utilize the language that they're comfortable with, then there's automatically a deeper connection made with them, and they're more engaged because they get the feeling of, you know, what you're talking about. You understand them.
And what we mean by language is like industry terms or things that are specific to that industry and their terminology that they use, which, you know, might not jump out in front of you, but it's good to keep in mind to use language that you would use similar to talking to a business person if you were getting, you know, in an interview and you had to be very detailed about yourself and explain things for them to understand it. So, you know, keep in mind, this is often their first go around sometimes with experience to these programs. So if you can develop a script that hits on all of the different points, but allows you to convey that in a very business-like manner using business lingo, then you're probably going to be more effective. If your delivery, like Even said, is really, you know, choppy or confusing, that is going to tell them right off the bat, oh, I'm not going to be supported very great. This might be a really big challenge. You know, this person can't even really explain it to me. So how confusing is this program really?
Mhm.
So really take into consideration your approach to the development of the employer.
And that's where the whole, you know, reaching out in a low pressure manner can be so helpful. Being an active listener. It's okay if you don't have solutions for them right away. Sometimes it's even better if you listen to the concerns that they might have or the needs that they might have, and you say, you know what, those are big concerns. Let me see if I can think of something, and then following up on it. Because again, this is the start of a relationship. It's long term. It's not so. It's very rare that you will go into a site, brand new site with zero exposure, talk to a manager, have them be on board, and have students working there the next day. It happens extremely rarely, but most of the times it's a dance. Sometimes it can take months before it happens. And it's important to understand that. And that's why it's important to have multiple things cooking kind of in a way till a place really, really opens up for you and your class. So be curious, be interested in what they're talking about in their field. Again, it helps build that level of connection with them.
Also,
And
if
that-
you reach out in a low pressure manner before you have a student in mind, then you're basically just introducing them to the program. You are there to support their personnel needs, to help them fill gaps in their employment, or to help them discover what tasks are not getting done and that your student might be able to help them complete. So if you reach out in the beginning just to understand their personnel needs before you have a student in mind, it's low pressure. You're not pushing them on anything. You're not asking them to buy into anything right at that moment. You're just there to understand their business and their staffing needs. That's it. And then you can leave and then contact them later and say, you know, when we got together this first time, you mentioned that you might have this need. I have a student that could really, you know, help you out. Would you be interested in talking, you know, more about the program and what it might mean to have a student come and work in your business, place of business? So the low pressure aspect of it might make some of you who are more trepidatious about approaching employers more confident, because you're not asking them to buy anything today or to sign on the dotted line today. And that might reduce some of the initial, a lot of the pressure from that initial contact.
A lot of times they don't know how to cooperate or how to work with additional programs and what it really looks like. So it might seem like a good solution, but they're just not sure of the red tape that they have on their end in order to make it happen. But to answer one of the things that was posted earlier of, you know, how to engage and do these different things, it's by being able to provide this curiosity and by being a good listener. What you're really doing is you're selling them a free product of your consultation of, tell me what's going on, tell me what areas you need help with. I'm going to come up with a solution for you for free. That's a huge deal because consultants can cost a lot of money for big industries, and the product that you're providing isn't just bringing in the student, it's being able to tackle the issues that they might have at their workplace. So keeping these valuable relationships, it's really important to, you know, like Nicole was saying, make a contact without a specific student in mind. It reduces the stress. Provide them all the information that they might need. You know, work with employers to be sure they have the information that they need to best support the student once they're at the site. And then it's important to set standards of evaluation, both on-site and off, knowing how frequently they're comfortable with checking in, knowing how frequently you're going to be checking with them, if the expectation is on them to check in with you, all those different things. And then making sure that their needs are met as an employer. If there is something that the student isn't doing well, for them to have a level of comfort with you to let you know right off the bat. Versus, and this happens too, and it's not always controllable, is that something might not be going perfectly well at the site. And instead of the manager reaching out to you immediately, they wait and they wait, and it keeps escalating and escalating. And then if the first time you hear about it, they're agitated and they want to end the relationship. So one of the analogies I use is usually like dating. Think about when you first go on a date. You know, you might be in a place where you want a long-term committed relationship, but if you're meeting with your date for the very first time and you start off with that, typically doesn't work out too good. So this is similar. You want to kind of build up your relationship, your level of trust, so that you can have honest, concrete conversations. And a lot of times you kind of have to wait on them to be ready for that next step. You just kind of have to approach them where they're at. And then along with making sure that their needs are being met. Follow up after the experiences for the feedback, ask for referrals, just keep connected. Nicole, was there anything you wanted to add to this one?
Yeah, and a big element of supporting the employer, you need to consider when you're going in, you're trying to develop this site for the student, but you're also developing the employer. A lot of you mentioned some negative attitudes towards disabilities. So if you approach an employer and they seem a little unsure about that, you could give them educational materials. If you have a student that has a specific disability or specific needs, provide all of that information up front so that employer understands whole picture of what they're stepping into and how to best support that student. Because if they're not familiar with the disability or that student, then they're not going to necessarily know how to anticipate their needs, or when a need arises, how to meet that need. So employers are important to educate and to give background on the best ways to support either that specific student or students, disabled students in general.
So when it comes to engaging employers, does anybody in here have any additional tips? Yeah, that educating the employer part is extremely important. And, they won't flat out say they've never worked with somebody with a disability or their expectations are extremely low. But by being able to provide them that information appropriately and provide a space where they can have those conversations can be really, really helpful as well. Everybody's new and they would like to hear tips. Yeah, that's a good one. Liability. Liability is one that pops up all the time. And just the question alone comes from a place of fear, place of uncertainty, place of unknown. So the more things you can dispel for them and the more things you are comfortable talking about and confident talking about, the more trusting they're going to be with what's it called? With the process itself. So selling the ability, not the disability. Focusing on the things that can get done, for sure. When looking at what their issue is at the site, what gap they have, you're providing a solution for it. The disability component doesn't have to be the main point of the conversation. The point is you have a need, I have a solution for you.
Yeah, a strength-based approach is really an important aspect to working with any individual. But it's explicitly important when you're working with disabled individuals, because sometimes no one has really focused on their strengths. Maybe everybody is focusing on the deficits and the things that they cannot do. Maybe they've had decisions made for them. Maybe they don't have a lot of agency or confidence in, expressing things or making decisions for themselves. So definitely try to identify strengths and use what you've identified also to align them with their position.
Yeah, and then some of the things that I saw, go when the business is slow, absolutely. There's certain times where, like I know grocery store managers are typically slammed most of the time. So finding like 5 minutes, 10 minutes is going to be a more appropriate time slot than wanting to break out half an hour or an hour. You kind of have to bend to their availability, especially at the beginning when you're building out their relationship. You don't want to come off too strong. And then giving the options, letting them know. I love this one that's up right now, is letting them know it's okay to not accept the student from the interview and having a conversation about it, because that gives you an awesome opportunity on the back end to help support the student through that process of rejection. Nobody likes not getting a job. So it helps if you're able to be there to help them process that information. So we'll keep going through because I see we're already at 1:30. So some of the best practices for evaluation and feedback, explain to them the importance, understanding the employer's schedule, and setting up a time where you can hopefully meet with them on site to get some feedback. That way, if there's an issue that the student isn't able to complete a task, they can show you what that task is, so you can bring it back to the classroom. And then identify different ways you can communicate with the manager or whoever's overseeing the student. Do they prefer phone, text, email, leaving voicemails back and forth, or meeting in person? Whatever their preferred method is, I would strongly suggest, at least at the beginning, really being flexible to that. And then as the relationship grows, then you can look at different options as well. Because again, you're making these relationships not just for a student. It might start off that way sometimes. You're looking for long-term, ongoing relationships. And try to build up frequent feedback if they're able to do that. They might not have the time to meet every day, but sometimes just shooting a text after a shift can be helpful. Like, how was today? Thumbs up, thumbs down. It doesn't have to be a long conversation. Giving them a survey would also be awesome, but sometimes they don't have time to fill that out either. So really take a look at the standardized procedures that you have or that you might want to build out to evaluate and get feedback from the employers to see if it's absolutely the information that you need. We would all love extra information, but try to find the core 3 to 5 questions that you want to ask them. So yeah, is there anything
The
else?
next topic sorry to cut you off. I
Oh,
was
you're
just
good.
late. The next topic that they wanted to learn a lot about was following up with the employer at the end of the engagement,
So
the very last one.
So for this one, it's important to take time to reflect on your site development, to identify the strengths and weaknesses and adjust where needed. And when you've had a strong relationship with them, I'll ask, hey, when we first met, how was that? A little bit more professional than that, but that's ultimately the question I'm asking. Like, how was my approach to this conversation? Where did I win you over? Were there things you were nervous about that I was saying? And it all depends on that honest relationship, that honest connection that you're able to build with the individual. So getting that feedback is really, really helpful, not just for future development of sites, but that level of vulnerability and transparency will help with that current site, because the ultimate goal is that when you try and develop in a new place, you can tell the new location, hey, I told you my side. I told you the things that I think we can bring to you. But why don't you talk to some of the other businesses we partnered with in the past? Because nothing sells better just in general than somebody from the field who understands what the needs are. They can speak to it much better than we will be able to most of the time. And then that just kind of helps maintain relationships and keep building new ones. The next one is this point of staying in touch, whether it's been a successful partnership or a partnership that hasn't happened yet, making sure that you're keeping track. When's the last time you've engaged with them and who's done it? In the teams that I've worked with, there would be specific sites where it didn't matter for my team who would go. We were all like, it was a really, really strong partnership. It was fine. But then there's specific sites where, let's say, Nicole and I are in the same team. Nicole has a better relationship with them, something about me they don't like, or vice versa. That happens too, and it's important to keep track of that. The more standardizing that you can do across your school, across your organization, and even across the district in a lot of ways helps in the long run, because there's nothing worse than walking into a site trying to, you just build up the courage to go in and you start your spiel essentially, and they're like, whoa, I already talked to somebody from your school a few days ago. And it's like, oh, now the question you want to ask them, yeah, really? Who? And it just shows the level of disorganization from your end, and it doesn't help build confidence. So also try to document activities and that your students have done and different things that they're able to do, just in general for the future, as well for being able to build out that referral list. So if you're going to a new site, you know which referral numbers to kind of give out. And
This
then,
can also be
Mhm.
helpful when you're for documenting. You can document if a student went there and their experience wasn't great and you went back and you asked for feedback and you added it onto that spreadsheet, then maybe next time you have a student that's really likely to succeed, you can recontact that employer and say, I have another student. I understand X, Y, and Z related to the feedback that you gave me. Would you be willing to try again? And then you can send them a student that might have greater success based on the feedback that you got. And maybe you're able to rebuild a previous relationship that you might have thought was gone, particularly if you're marking the activities that the employers are having students do in the workplace, and you have a student that can land all of those things. Send them there and maybe try and reinvigorate that relationship.
On the other side of it too is I keep track of kind of like when you're done with an Uber ride or a Lyft ride, you get to give stars, right? In a similar sense of what the connection is with that site. Do I have to send a student over there that I know is going to just be amazing with very little needed support because that's the only type of student that they're ready to work with at that point in time? Or is it a site that I can call the manager and say, hey, I have a student, I think they'll do well, I think they'll be challenged in the right ways. Are you in a place to be able to support somebody like that right now? Because with a lot of different businesses, they have different seasons, they have different levels of busyness depending on the year. But ultimately, you want a relationship where you can go and send your students to learn, to struggle in a good way, struggle in that growth mindset type way, struggle, and you know that they're going to go in an environment where they're going to be appropriately celebrated and supported as they're struggling versus being negative towards them when that happens. So I keep a ranking system of the site. If a student had a bad experience there, then I know it's a site I need to pay closer attention to and go visit more often and show up more often just to kind of see how things are going, because I don't want my student going to a place that they don't have a positive experience. And then, while you're keeping track of those things and sharing those things, when you onboard new staff, training them on that system, talking to them about that system, and consistently updating it and checking it before you go into the store. So additional follow-up is having the students themselves be involved in it, having them do a thank you note, whether that's through an email, whether they're okay with writing, even a video message. All those things carry weight. We love to see our students succeed, but there's nothing cooler when you have an employer who was, let's say, difficult to convince, be equally as excited. There's such a cool feeling to see if you share a video with them that a student made specifically for them, how emotional they'll get in the best possible way. And it makes them, they become an advocate then. And that to me was one of the coolest things because I don't know the level of ripple effect that will have. Um, so the school as well would be awesome if they can get involved, whether it's doing some sort of recognition, whether it's even sending some promotional items. One of the things that I've done in the past is I've invited them to be recognized by my board. And that was huge, especially as Nicole was saying, if you identify companies who do have a message of wanting to be inclusive, any any promotion that they can get towards that is big kudo points for them, but it also brings them closer to the community, which almost every single business wants. So thank you note from the school, or certificate of appreciation, 100%. If the school can do that, again, if that can be something that is, what's it called, standardized, if there's a system of doing it, you can even set it up as like employed 10 students, 15 students, whatever else. All those different things can be very, very helpful. Doing a shout out on your social media for it, if it's appropriate. Of course, everyone has to agree for the information to be public. And even inviting them to graduation or whatever ceremonies you might have for the students completing at their sites. Where to next, Nicole?
The third was the student, preparing the student.
Areas of, preparing the student. So there is A lot of different areas. We talked last week about different soft skills and how the list is essentially endless. You know, I would prepare them to be aware that they're going to be getting feedback, and just knowing that there's going to be some action taken behind that feedback. For a lot of them, it's going to be the first time they're even hearing about this or experiencing something like this. Yes, they get grades, but it's different. The school setting and the work setting doesn't 100% translate when it comes to this. So helping them deal with that feedback too is a really, really important skill, because sometimes it's not as objective as we would want it to be. And then in the perfect world, what research that Nicole has found has said is that it'd be awesome for there to be 3 hours on school days and up to 18 hours in a school week for the students to be at a site. Ultimately, you want to stretch it out over time for them to be on a site versus getting it done in a few weeks, because it gives them the opportunity to learn and digest, but it also takes the pressure off the employer too. And then just, again, continuously checking in. I'm just looking at the time, so I'm just going to move forward. If there's any specific questions about this, please use the Q&A section and we'll get to it at the end. So again, you want to prepare them with all the things that you kind of prepared yourself with before you entered the business to make that connection. You know, finding out the nature of the company, what is their organizational chart, like who they would go to if there's an issue or if there was something that you needed to talk to them about. Looking at the safety, especially now with COVID, things are changing so rapidly as to the expectations of what is considered safe and unsafe. A lot of these different considerations, the more you can prime them with and even provide them a printout that they can have or whatever way is the best for them to learn, the more they're set up for success. Even if you're going into, let's say it's a store, even if you go in there with the student without a setup meeting and just walk around the store together, look at the store from the outside, identify areas where they can go for breaks, all these different things can alleviate some of the pressures. I always think of my first day at school. I was the nerd that would go a day before and like check where all my classrooms are because I didn't want to be late. And sometimes these things, especially as new employees, they don't think of them until it's too late. The next step would be trying to see if you can organize a tour with the employer, have some natural conversations. This helps demystify what disability means to somebody who isn't very familiar and hasn't worked with disabled people before. It's always difficult saying this verbiage, but having normal interactions is something that sometimes employers don't anticipate. By doing that, you're breaking down stereotypes. And you can also teach the student on the back end on how to research the company, research the store. So again, they're prepared with good questions to ask the employer. This next one, I can spend 3 hours talking about the level of importance. In most of my career, I've had the wonderful opportunity of serving students once they've left K through 12. And one of the things that is necessary in most students' lives from beginning till way beyond is self-advocacy. It helps with all these different areas, but it really helps build the connection with their employer to be able to advocate what their needs are. And one of the big things you can help them figure out too is asking, knowing how to answer the question of when they work best. So what we wanted to ask you is, can you tell us when do you typically work best? You know, when it comes to a work environment, when it comes to your hours, indoors, outdoors, it can be anything. This question is really, really vast in the possibility of answers to it, just because we put different levels of importance on different things. Somebody's a morning person working at home. I wake up at 5 a.m. because I love working early. So a lot of well, good thing you guys are working at schools, right? So early mornings. How about, does anybody have
And
a
I'm
preference?
thinking with,
Oh, go
I'm
ahead.
sorry, I'm thinking with the time, since we're gonna give them the PDF of the presentation, maybe we could skip over the areas of learning that they can read those slides, and we can just open it up for some Q&A.
Yeah. And would that be okay? As Ann
Yeah,
runs to the
sure.
mute button? Okay.
Sounds good.
Good morning, late night. Good. So this is something, again, that's important for our students to be able to answer in a lot of different ways. Do they want to work alone? Do they want to work in a group? A mix of both. When it's fine, the internet's not being overused. Yep, my connection right now is kind of there. Okay, great. So here, let me just jump to the end if it'll let me. Oh, that was not what I was aiming to do. 1 second.
If you want to go ahead and start putting your questions in the chat box or in the Q&A, then we can start opening up the dialogue. We didn't really leave a lot of time for people to answer questions in the last two, and they were really information heavy. So we thought we'd give a little extra time now for everyone to share their questions or their thoughts, or maybe what they learned. There's nothing in the question and answer box yet, but hopefully some will come up soon. In the lesson plans that we are including in the, not lessons plans, excuse me, areas of focus for learning that we've included, some of the activities include how to assess or how to build time management skills. Some are after the engagement and extracting skills from the workforce and thinking about those skills. And are they skills I use in school? Are they also skills that I use at home? And then going through and sort of marking down what skills were important in each of the students' engagements, and then making big lists of those. So there's very detailed slides with that information for you to find.
Yeah, and we're going to be mailing out this presentation by next week to Ann, and then she can share it with everyone that's here.
We don't have any questions yet. If you want to jump to some of those slides, I guess it would be okay. There doesn't seem to be a rush for questions.
So we can look at the areas of focus. So include the student in this process as much as you can. You can talk to them about how many hours they would like to work. How are they going to get to the job? Who's going to be involved in taking them there? How are their sleeping patterns and their eating patterns? Were they going to buy lunch, or they're going to bring lunch? Different things like that.
We have a question. Often students don't know how to talk to adults and are afraid to ask employer for things. They want us to ask for them. Is practice the only way to get them comfortable? Practice is a really good way. The more times you do something, the less anxiety you have when you reapproach it, but practice isn't the only way. Preparing them with information, preparing them for what they're going to feel. Like if you're working with an autistic person, you could say, when you go to ask the employer for something, you're going to feel really nervous and it's going to be really uncomfortable. And we understand that. But an important aspect of working successfully in the workplace is being able to ask for the things that you need and to talk about them. So practice is important, but setting the student up and leveling their expectations so that they are not surprised when they get really scared or nervous and they stop talking and they can't think. And so just kind of prepare them for the whole background of the experience.
And normalizing it. I mean, who doesn't feel a little freaked out to go talk to their supervisor, especially if it's a brand new job, or if they have a question, knowing that, oh my God, I've already asked 5 questions, I have another question, and they can tell if the manager is getting frustrated or anything like that. The part that's really important is open conversation. I teach a class called Communication on the Job, and one of the things that I do is ask the students to describe a difficult work situation. And then we talk about it together as a class. They share it anonymously. One of the things was a student was getting in trouble for going to the bathroom too much. And we talked about sometimes you have to go for medical reasons. Sometimes it's the only place that is private, less stimulation, all these different things. But what it allowed for was this conversation of self-advocacy, of being comfortable with saying, like, you know what, maybe I do get overstimulated. Maybe I can talk to my manager Where is it okay for me to go if I need a few minutes to myself? And if those things are normalized, and the student knows that maybe you have felt that way too in the past or something similar, they're going to become a little bit more likely to be able to say those things to their supervisor. Another thing too, when you have these strong relationships with employers, it's what teachers do as well. It's just like off to the side parenting. The parents talk to each other. They know what the kid is going to come up saying, so they know to be on the same front when they get asked the question in two different points of time if they're not there together. And then,
Another, sorry, another question is, it's been my practice to always endorse the student worker with the manager on the first workday. Any suggestions for a student worker who prefers to go alone on his or her first workday?
I think it's awesome if students have that level of confidence. I know for me, I am like a worried mom in my car or like at school or whatever, staring at my clock, like, oh, they're about to start. I wonder how it's going to go. All I want to do is text the manager to know how it's going. First of all, I think that's wonderful that you do that and that you offer that level of support to them. But then if they're willing to go on their own, prepare them, as I'm sure you do. Let them know, not necessarily, well, if I don't go, all these things can go wrong. But instead, if they don't have the best experience afterwards, please don't say, well, you should have had me go with you. But focus on what next time when they start a new job, what they can do to make it a little bit better for them.
Yeah, maybe make them a checklist. Like, first you're going to come in, you're going to clock in, you're going to put your stuff away, and make sure that you really explain that on time doesn't necessarily mean at the very minute that they're supposed to start their shift. Let them know that really in the business world, on time means you've gotten there early enough to put your stuff away and change into your work uniform or whatever you might need to do, and you've clocked in and you're at your seat. That's where you want to be, ready to work or at your position or your station by the time you know, their time is supposed to be there. Like on time, it should be, they should be there and ready to work.
And you know, oh, sorry.
Do you think?
Oh, let me just add a little bit to that before you look at that next one. You know your students best. Some students are going to do awesome with a bunch of different directions. Some students can handle paying attention to a few things at a time. So again, that's where you prime the manager and the staff that's going to be working with the student to know what their expectations should be. So they might, you might be building up, you might be chaining up the amazing level of work that the student can do, but they're not going to start off that way day one. But if they can see progress towards a strong employee, that's excellent as well.
Another question that was up there was, so it wasn't really a question, it was a statement about avoidance being a big factor. Another thing you really want to remember is that autistics and other individuals can sometimes struggle with demand avoidance. They get a lot of anxiety built up inside them when they need to do something. It doesn't mean that they don't want to do it or that they're avoiding it. It means that sometimes really intense anxiety is preventing them from being able to step forward and do that. And then another person mentioned that they wanted to highlight how important it is when job developing that you have both the pressure to secure the job sites, but you have to remind yourselves that you are definitely there to build the relationships with the employers. So you might not get a yes right away. And that's a really good point. That's in the chat box. Another question that was up was, do you think video modeling or role playing are valuable activities to help prepare students for interview and job expectations? Yes.
Yes. You're going to have students who might be very timid about it, not as good about it, but any type of practice helps. I compare it often to interview practicing, just in general. We all know the advice: record yourself, do it with a friend. It helps. It never replaces the real thing, but it's important to do anything that you can to emulate what the environment is going to look like, what the conversations might look like. It's not uncommon to be on the phone if you're not there in person with the student. If they're nervous about asking for some sick time, or asking for a vacation or whatever else, that you're there coaching them minutes before they go in. So it's important to provide them that support and ability to practice, but also identify appropriate coping mechanisms for them too. I have a little fidget thing that I constantly use while I'm teaching or presenting or anything like that, because that helps my stress level down. For them, it might be breathing, it might be a tactile thing in their pocket. Headphones help them figure out what those different things are and what works.
The next is, it says, our students work after school and if you work in the morning on weekends, is it still a good idea to ask them the time they prefer to work? When we were saying I work best when, we weren't necessarily meaning what time of the day you work best. It's I work best when I can wear noise canceling headphones. I work best when I'm in an area that doesn't have a lot of visual clutter or a lot of people walking by because I get distracted by all of the noises. I work best when my job tasks change frequently because then I don't get bored and then slow down my productivity. I work best when instructions are written down or I get a follow-up meeting after any time we engage person to person. So it's not necessarily about saying during the day do you want to work, but how do you work best, meaning what can we do? Instead of saying I need an accommodation, say what do you need to work best, so that students can get away from that accommodation, and they're thinking more about, well, how do I work good and what do I need in the workplace? And they might be able to say to their employer, I work best when I'm able to wear noise canceling headphones. Would that be okay? So they've just kind of asked for an accommodation, but they didn't ask for it in an accommodating way. They're saying, I work best when I do this. So I want to work my best for you. Can I wear these headphones so I can do my best for you when we're on the job?
It's much more empowering doing it that way. And again, it pushes for that level of confidence in the student not to feel bad about asking for an accommodation in some ways, but instead they're advocating like, hey, exactly what Nicole said. You want me to do my best? These would be the things that would happen.
Can you also touch on, I know one thing for me, like I've got a lot of managers that when they do our little mini evaluation on the timesheets, they give the kids all 5s because they're like, well, they're like nice kids. And you can tell that they're just doing 5s, but they're not really taking it seriously. Do you have any tips on what we could do when we're noticing a pattern of maybe they're just doing 5s for the sake of doing 5s?
Give up once. No.
I think if you outline during the process where you're setting standards for evaluation and you're telling them the importance of evaluation and feedback, then hopefully you can convey that just because they may seem like they can't do things, they can, and they want the feedback because that's the only way that they're going to grow. So if you just give them a pass every single time, that's not helping them level themselves up in the workplace. We all need feedback in order to learn. So if you present that sort of like, well, I really need my students to learn. So if you just give them 5s all the time, it's not super constructive. It's great if they're getting a 5, but I would say maybe check in with them.
It's not too early to be honest with them and to teach them to accept difficult feedback. It's not the funnest part, but you get to see the fruits of that labor early on too, because then you can have those honest conversations with them, but also you set them up more for success that way. If you've had a student who's placed and they should really be getting 3s or 2s, but you give them 5s, the messaging you're giving them is, for your very first job that you've ever done, you killed it. You did an amazing job. When in fact, it's very rare for somebody to get all 5s or mostly 4s and 5s. We always have things we can improve on. We always have things we should be working on so that we can be better employees. And that has to start early as well. So yes, it might be beneficial. It might feel good not to be the bad guy, to tell the bad news, but are you serving the student at that point? Would you want somebody to do that to you? Would you want somebody to do that to your kid? Or would you want them to know the areas where they can grow? So that comes close to that does come to the end of our time. One of the things we also wanted to share is that we're currently offering some free trainings throughout April and May. You can check those out at our website and register for them. And they are awesome, and they're free. So please feel free to check those out.
The
And
building the value proposition one is a really good one for any of you who are working on their approach style. The value proposition really helps you understand where the value lies in the worker and how to better sell them as an attractive package for them.
and it's cool because it's focused on that topic, the whole trading is. So you get to dive in much, much deeper versus covering some of the topics, the surface level topics of it. And then just the last thing we wanted to ask, if possible, to please fill out our survey. It helps us out. We weren't too thrilled in the past with not having so many points of participation. So we're hoping that this time it was helpful and more beneficial. And then Nicole, are you able to paste that in to the chat?
Yeah.
Wonderful. And
And-
then our contact information, if you have any additional questions for us or anything you would like to talk to us about.
Oh, I just copy and pasted research.
That's important too.
Wonderful, and thank you both. I think this was really helpful. I was jotting down some notes, but I especially liked that piece of research that said about students work best when it's 3 hours a day and 18 hours a week. Because I think sometimes we think of it like, oh, we've got these 100 hours that students need to work and we rush to get through it. And a lot of times if we rush, by the end, the manager barely knows the student's name. So it's neat that there's some research tied to show that slow and steady is sometimes best. So that really stood out to me. So thank you very much. And I think we got a lot out of this. And I think I'm excited to get back to the days when we can go in and make these connections with employers and get our students working again. So I appreciate you guys breaking down all the tips and pointers for us.
Thanks. We
Absolutely.
hope that you enjoy your week off, your well-deserved spring break.
Yeah. Again, thank you all for what you do. The amount of work all of you have had to do in the last year and beyond that as well is just so much. Sincerely, thank you for what you do every day.
Yeah, thank you both for taking the time these 3 weeks to come and present to everyone. It's really appreciated. And we definitely hope to see you again and collaborate with you in the future. As Anne said, and as Even said, we have the survey links both for Grit and Flow and also for our LAUSD feedback. One was on the screen and one is in the chat. So we appreciate your feedback because it does help us determine how we're going to plan going forward. And with that, looks like Anne also added the link for the flyer as well in the chat. The flyer has all of the upcoming webinar titles if you're interested in attending. And, we've been asked many times, can this be shared? Absolutely. It can be shared with district staff and non-district staff. So that includes staff from other districts, other SELPAs, as well as our charter partners. Because we have the benefit of having a webinar license, we are welcoming everyone who would be interested in learning. So of course the license does have a cap, but we're not quite there yet. So with that, thank you all for your time today. I'm going to go ahead and end the webinar, which will end it for everyone. And for those of you in LA Unified who are going on spring break, have a great spring break. And we will see you all not next week, but the week after.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Bye-bye.